This message is brought to you by DoNotAge.org, the longevity research organisation that's on a mission to extend HealthSpan for as many people as possible via products that actually work. Start your journey today at DoNotAge.org and use code LLAMA for a 10% discount. That's LLAMA.
I just kind of had this epiphany. My patients aren't getting any better. They're still fat. They still have arthritis. They feel terrible. They're still getting heart disease, kidney disease. Their quality of lives weren't changing. And so I just thought there's got to be a better way.
Hello again and welcome to the Live Long and Master Aging podcast. I'm Peter Bowes. This is where we explore the science and stories behind human longevity. Now in this episode we're going to explore the colliding worlds, and I mean colliding in a positive sense, the colliding worlds of healthcare and podcasting. There is a vast array of podcasts dedicated to what could loosely be called the longevity space, including FitRx, which is hosted by Dr. Greg Dennis. Greg is a family practice physician in Oklahoma City, in the state of Oklahoma, here in the US. He is an outspoken advocate for dietary interventions to promote good health and potentially a long health span. He believes in it and he podcasts about it. We recently joined forces to record a joint episode for both FitRx and Live Long and Master Aging. Here's our conversation.
Today will be an interesting podcast as I'm going to be interviewing someone as they're also interviewing me. So my guest today is Peter Bowes. He is a freelance journalist and broadcaster who also hosts his own podcast called Live Long and Master Aging. Peter, welcome to the show.
Greg, it's really good to talk to you. And it's interesting. This is probably new for us both in kind of doing this dual interview. It's such a rapidly expanding sphere of narrowcasting, I suppose, looking at healthcare through the eyes of a podcaster. And I always view this as people like yourself, especially trying to reach an audience that perhaps isn't hearing messages, the kind of things that you believe in from other forms of media or perhaps even their own doctor. And I think that's probably what I reflect in my podcast, looking at longevity, looking at diet and exercise and supplementation and all those issues that go with trying to pursue a long and healthy life.
Well, very nice. So you kind of already answered my a little bit of my next question, but I always like kind of getting to know my guests a little bit, and so I'm just curious, as somebody who's a journalist and broadcaster, like what kind of attracted you to the longevity space and what made you start researching this and then ultimately to start a podcast focused on longevity?
Well, I think I've always been interested in the longevity space as it applies to myself. And I think anyone who has a passion for this subject, it starts with your own physical fitness. So that's always been an interest. As a journalist and as a broadcaster working mostly for the BBC over the last few decades, I got an opportunity to make some documentaries looking at this whole issue of longevity, of living long, especially health span as opposed to lifespan, which is something that interests me a lot. In other words, maximizing the number of healthy years as opposed to just maximizing our lifespan, which doesn't necessarily include healthy years at the end for some people. And I got very interested in that. Had an opportunity to go to the University of Southern California to meet Dr. Walter Longo, one of the leading lights, of course, in this sphere, who has done a lot of work on fasting and his fasting mimicking diet. I actually took part in one of his early human clinical trials looking at that particular diet. I think it was one of the first 19 human subjects after he, of course, put a lot of work in with mice and in other areas of research. But as his studies developed, it became possible, it became safe to apply this diet to humans, and I was one of the first to look at that. So that really drew me into this, not only to how the science could apply to myself, but actually how the science is carried out. And it's really fascinating being part of a clinical trial. I'm sure you talk about trials and studies all the time, and so do I, but actually being one of the subjects really opened a new door for me to see how scientists like Longo and others actually carried out their research. And it was with the backdrop of all of that I wanted to delve into the subject in more detail. And as you well know, a podcast gives you that opportunity. There's no hard out. You don't have to end after 29 minutes and 59 seconds. You can keep going a bit. You can talk in depth. And that's what I wanted to do with the podcast.
When did you start the podcast?
2017.
Okay.
So we're actually just coming up to our 5th birthday.
Wow. Okay.
With the podcast, which I know you'll appreciate. This is an achievement over 5 episodes is quite good for most podcasters. So hopefully it's tough work at times. It's quite time consuming work, but it's very rewarding. And 180 episodes fairly soon. It's interesting to see how the science changes, and also to see how the science doesn't change. I listened back to some episodes from 5 years ago, and things that experts were telling me then still resonate a lot with the current science. But clearly things do change, and it's nice to be able to follow how they do.
Yeah, I have really enjoyed it. It has given me a platform to meet a lot of people, like yourself and others that I would have never been able to visit with. And it's nice hearing different perspectives. And, a lot of times people are like-minded, but, maybe have a different twist on things. And so, it's been nice. It does keep me busy. I have a full-time practice as well. And so, I do the podcasts myself as far as the editing and everything. And so sometimes, when I'm editing my podcast every week, I think, why am I doing this? But then whenever I go to interviewing people like yourself, and I always get done and I think, yeah, that's why I do it. I like it. So
is there a sense of you wanting to try to reach an audience that you feel doesn't have the kind of information that you as a doctor feel as if they should have, especially based on your experience? And I know you've got a passion for diet and dietary interventions and how that can help people without the need of pharmaceuticals or supplementation, that pure, sensible, science-based interventions can make such a big difference to people.
Absolutely. And I hope it reaches those people, and I hope it reaches healthcare providers as well. And now I don't know how many other healthcare providers listen to, my podcast or other podcasts, but, kind of my goal is that they learn some of the things that I've learned, and that is that our quote standard of care, and my listeners have heard me talk about this before, but our standard of care and what we call healthcare cares nothing about your health or my health. Our healthcare system is a big money-making machine that's kind of led by Big Pharma. And I know I'm going to sound like a conspiracist here, but Big Pharma is in bed with our governing organizations like the American Medical Association, American Diabetes Association, and people like that. And so that's why things don't change, or at least they don't change very, very rapidly. And you can look around. It's probably a little bit worse here in Oklahoma than it is in California, but you can look around and see how unhealthy people are. And our standard of care explanation or solution rather to that is just give more drugs, give more medication. And I think when I talk to other doctors, most can agree that, yeah, people aren't really getting any healthier, and so that's kind of what happened to me. Just to kind of give you a brief history of what brought me into this. I was practicing the quote standard of care in what I would call evidence-based medicine. And when people would question something, I would tell them that. I would say, hey, I practice evidence-based medicine, because most doctors don't like it when a patient questions them, I'd say, hey, I'm quote evidence-based medicine. And I've always been a healthy guy and I've always been into fitness, but when it came to practicing medicine, I did it just how I was taught. And, you prescribe a medication for this, medication for that. And there's not a lot of prevention going on. And there's certainly not a lot of treating the underlying root causes. You're just putting a Band-Aid on it. And again, that's why people are so sick. And, the community, the people don't know any better. I mean, that's just what they know. And frankly, that's what they expect, is to go to the doctor and get a medication. And so one day I just kind of had this epiphany, and I thought, my patients aren't getting any better. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. On paper, their numbers look better. So their cholesterol goes down, their hemoglobin A1C is down because I've got them on all these diabetes medications, but they're still sick. They're still fat. They still have arthritis. They feel terrible. They're still getting heart disease, kidney disease. So their quality of lives weren't changing. And so I just thought there's got to be a better way. And so it was about that same time I started questioning some of the things that, some medical dogma like cholesterol is an example. And we are just so misinformed on cholesterol in general and the impact that it has. And so I started just kind of diving into that. And the more I learned about that, I thought, that's not what I was taught, and so as I began to discover the truth about that, then I thought, okay, what else is out there that I've been doing wrong? And so I discovered things like diabetes that, like, hey, I can treat diabetes. I can reverse diabetes. Like, nobody ever taught me I can reverse. Now we're talking type 2, not type 1, but I can reverse type 2 diabetes, and nobody ever told me that. Nobody ever taught me that, and they just said, give more medicine. If their blood sugar in control, give more medication. And so anyway, all of this didn't happen overnight. It was over a time period. And so doctors, they unfortunately, they don't have time to question things. And so they practice how they're taught, and they just keep doing the same thing. And if somebody questions them, well, no, this is the way we do it. And so all that's to say, I really transformed the way that I practice. And then with doing that, I was still in corporate medicine at the time, and I realized, I'm just not a fit anymore for corporate medicine when I had 5 minutes to spend with a patient and I'm seeing, 25 a day, and I just wasn't a fit anymore. And so I left, and luckily my wife had opened up, she's a physician as well, and so she had opened up a practice, and it was an easy fit for me just to step right in. And now we have a cash-based practice. We don't use any insurance or accept any insurance, and it's a much smaller, more intimate feel, and I have a lot of time with patients that we can really get to the root problems, try to get them off medications, try to work on their diet, work on their nutrition, supplements and lifestyle, exercise and all that, and really get them well. So, my wife and I have said many of times we feel like we're doing our best work since we've been, doing family practice. So.
And we'll continue this conversation in just a moment.
Hey, quick question for you. Are you someone who wants to be fit, healthy, and happy? And what if I told you could get your dream body by simply just listening to a podcast? I'm Josh.
And I'm KG, and we're the hosts of the Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast.
Listen, we get it. Fitness isn't easy. Carbs, no carbs.
Just stop, okay? It doesn't have to be that complicated. And that's why we made this podcast. We get straight to the facts so you can become your best you.
So the way to check us out is click the link in the show notes or search Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast on any of the major podcast platforms. We'll see you soon.
It's interesting, and maybe now isn't the time to delve into this. You did a very interesting episode recently about COVID and a lot of the related issues, and this whole problem of people, I suppose, not quite knowing what to believe and which sources that are out there, whether they're medical journals, whether they're pharmaceutical companies, whether they're doctors, whether they're government officials or presidents or prime ministers. The whole area has just become a lot murkier, hasn't it, in the last couple of years, which really, I suppose, underlines and emphasizes your gut feeling that there is a need for simply more information and more evidence-based information for people.
Absolutely. And other people are figuring that out as well. We have had so many people come to us since this COVID because they now have a distrust of the healthcare system. And we hear, gosh, on a daily basis, hey, I don't trust my doctor anymore, because they're drinking the Kool-Aid and they're buying into this narrative. And so I think patients are figuring out all of this, and COVID has exposed a lot of the inadequacies of our healthcare system.
We could probably talk about it for 2 hours,
Sure.
But let's talk about, and I mentioned diet and dietary interventions as being one of your main passions. I think it's on your website. It's just about the first thing that you talk about. I'm curious how you came to that realization. Was it a lot through personal experience and perhaps looking at what's on your own dinner plate and correlating that with the health of yourself and those close to you?
Yeah, so it was a little bit of both. So I've always been a pretty healthy guy, pretty fit, into some form of fitness, and that changes up. I ran marathons at one point in my life, and then I've got into weightlifting and CrossFit, and I've done all kinds of different things, but always been pretty fit. And so I would say when I got into my 40s, I was still pretty fit, but I just, as a lot of people do in their 40s, they start kind of missing a step or slowing down a little bit. And so I really wanted to optimize my health. And so that's when I just started studying more about diet and nutrition, because they really don't teach us much of that in medical school. And so it was just something I had an interest in, and started kind of researching that. And so I was, I guess, kind of my own guinea pig, and started eating healthier, just limiting processed foods and sugars. And, I did strict keto for a little while. And I mean, I've done a lot of different things, but it wasn't until years later when I realized that I could use that in my practice to help people. And that's, again, when I realized that I can actually reverse diabetes. And one of the cases that sticks in my mind when it kind of cemented this idea that I could reverse diabetes, and I was still kind of trying to figure out how to implement all this into my practice. But I had a guy, again, my listeners have probably heard this before, but he had an A1C of 14.5. Now, for those that don't know what an A1C is, it's a 3-month average of your blood sugar. You want your levels to be less than 6.5, ideally, less than that in a non-diabetic. But so anyway, 14.5 was really, really high. And he was reluctant to be on any medications. And historically, I would have, most doctors at an A1C that high would have put him on insulin, 3 or 4 different, oral medications. I mean, they would have thrown the kitchen sink at him. And I said, okay, we're going to try this. Here's how we do it. And so I, talked to him about, what raises insulin levels, and, maybe, higher fat, lower carb, intermittent fasting, exercise, the whole deal. And he was on board. And so he took that information, ran with it, came back. I told him to come back in 3 months. He came back in 4 months, and we rechecked his A1C, and it was, I believe it was 4.5.
Wow.
And his other markers, his insulin levels and different markers, were completely normal. And I said, you're healed. He did that all without medication. And so that was when I realized, wow, there's power in this nutrition and fasting and lifestyle change. And then that just kind of fueled, I guess, my passion to implement this into my practice.
In terms of fasting, how deep have you delved into fasting? There are so many different protocols these days. Intermittent fasting really is just an umbrella term, isn't it, for different forms of fasting? And in my view, actually quite, therefore, confusing to people when someone says, oh, you should try intermittent fasting. Well, what actually does that mean? Does that mean a 16-8? Does it mean a 23-1? Mm-hmm. Does it mean fasting seriously for 3 days and then not fasting again for another 3 weeks? I think the terminology in the longevity space actually needs to be sorted out so people can have a clearer vision as to what the different fasting protocols are. And then the next question, of course, is what is best for me, because we're all different in terms of how we respond to food.
I think what you just said is key. And for all those other things that you mentioned and all the ways you can fast, I would answer that as yes. I mean, those are all great. For me, I'm usually not dealing with people who come in and sometimes I am, but for the most part, I mean, intermittent fasting is a new concept for them. And, a lot of patients find us and they come to us because they're on a sack full of medicines. They want to change their life. They want to get healthy, which is great. We love those kind of people. But as we introduce these concepts to them, sometimes it's foreign. And so usually what I tell people is, I like to start with a 16-8. It seems, fairly straightforward to me. And it sounds like 16 hours sounds like a lot, but if you stop eating at 7 o'clock at night, which I tell people you should, because I always like a 3-hour window before going to bed, and you get up the next morning and just get breakfast, wait till lunch, you just went 16 hours. Now, for people who can't do that, or that's a hard time, I say, well, maybe extend it 2 hours. So if you're used to eating at 8 o'clock, try to extend that till 10 o'clock till you get used to that, and then extend that to to noon or 1 o'clock. I also tell people, I don't think you have to do that every single day. I think you can, but I don't know that you have to do it every day. But I think the point is to give your body some breaks from food. And I'm sure there's just a ton of health benefits to that. And that's probably one of the easiest and, cheapest things you can do is just give your body some breaks from eating. And not only can that help lose weight, decrease your insulin levels. I'm sure you've talked about autophagy, where you're kind of cleaning your body up, and it can do so many things. And anyway, so I advise people start there, but listen to your body. If your body is telling you that's too much, back off a little bit. But I like to get people to the point where they're doing that at least maybe 3 times a week. And then once they're used to that, then I'll tell them to start pushing the envelope a little bit. So maybe once in a while, do a 20-hour fast. They don't have to do it every week, but maybe every couple of weeks, something like that. And then once they get to the point they can do that pretty easily, then maybe push it a little bit further and occasionally do a 2-day fast or a 3-day fast. And I don't know how many people, I don't think there's too many people that, really get to that point and take me up on that 2-3-day fast. But if they do that just every now and again, there's obviously a lot of health benefits to that. So I think you can get benefits from all the above. So it's finding out what works for the individual.
And I think it's interesting, and you probably got a better insight into this than me, that sometimes in life you go through things, maybe you're facing a surgery, maybe it's a colonoscopy, whatever the procedure is, and you're asked not to eat because you can't eat, because you can't have food in your system for whatever the procedure is going to be. My experience of that, and that's just correlating that to a fasting regime, has always been not so great actually during and the preparation for the procedure, but afterwards, that sense of being cleansed and completely emptied feels good.
Yeah.
It actually feels positive. And there is, in addition to that sort of mental high that you feel, that synapses snapping in your brain sensation once you get to a point in the fast that you're utilizing ketone bodies and not glucose. And I know we're diving into it here, but the whole experience of fasting is generally a positive one for me. And it's often difficult to get that through to people when you talk about fasting for the first time, that it may sound awful. It may sound like the antithesis of what you want to do and how you want to live your life. But very quickly you realize that you actually feel good.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think our bodies were meant to do that. I mean, that's the way we were designed. And, we've gotten into this idea that, we have to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks in between. And that's the way most people live. But you're absolutely right. I think our bodies were designed for that. And so once we get back to that, our bodies like it, and it makes us feel good.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose time-restricted eating is the other buzz phrase that a lot of people are using now. And in many senses, I think what we've just talked about, 16-8, is really time-restricted eating as opposed to fasting, because you don't go into a really deep fasting state over that still relatively short period of time.
Yeah, correct. Like I said, I think you got to start somewhere. And, because if somebody comes to me and they've never done this kind of thing, and I say, well, you need to really get the full benefits of a fast, you need to fast for at least 20 hours. And, I want you to do a 2 or 3 day fast. I mean, that's just not going to happen. And so I think starting them out slow and doing maybe that time restricted eating and ease into expanding that a little bit to where you're doing some longer fast. That's usually just the way I approach it. So.
Interesting. And just going back to how we started this, in terms of what I've learned from many of the guests, and I mentioned Walter Longo, but I've spoken to many others as well. And what is oftentimes very interesting to me is when I'm interviewing really old people on the podcast, so 80 plus, a couple of centenarians as well, and you dive into their lifestyles. They've reached a great age. They are still healthy and active and involved in life and having a good time. Very often, a fasting regime is there in the background, but they've never really thought about it.
Called it that,
they've just always lived like that. And that was how they were brought up, maybe to, as you described it, to have a long period of time between the last meal of the day, going to bed, no snacking, There was a time when people didn't snack. It's still a fairly modern day thing. And largely we've got grocery stores to blame for that. It's so easy to buy snacks and to eat them these days. We have them in our cars. But people didn't always live like that. And if you talk to very old people, they'll talk about that regimen of breakfast, lunch and dinner. But that was it. And you can almost see that built into their lifestyles was some degree of fasting. It's almost science working, but science not being acknowledged by those people who've lived to a great age.
Interesting. Yeah, it makes sense. Well, let me ask you if I may. So, you've been doing this, you said, for about 5 years, and I'm sure over the years had a lot of guests on. And so, other than, we were talking about fasting, and obviously that's one, but maybe what are some other things that you've learned from these guests that you've even implemented yourself to just kind of expand your health span and quality of life?
Yeah, I think in terms of implementing myself, one of the big things that I've learned is that yes, diet is important, but exercise is crucially important. And that is building into your daily lifestyle an element of vigorous exercise every day, which is something that I do. And I think it's important, and again, I've learned it from a number of people, to have a routine that you don't think about eventually, that it really does become just that, a routine. You get up in the morning and you do it, because as soon as people start thinking about exercise, thinking about going to the gym, there are barriers in the daily schedule that can upset it. So what I've tried to do is build in that routine, and generally I find it easier, and I think most people do, to get the exercise out of the way, at least the main exercise, as early in the morning as possible. So I do the time-restricted eating thing. I try to stop eating 6-7 o'clock in the evening, go through the night, get up at about 6 a.m. And my rule of thumb is before 9 a.m., and I'm guilty of checking emails and doing work and social media and all those things that we get drawn into. I'm guilty of doing that early on. But rule of thumb is before 9 a.m., I'll head out, I'll do a 3.5 mile hike with my dog, and the dog is a crucial part of it, but it's a 3.5 mile hike. It takes me about an hour and 5 minutes. It's quite vigorous. The first mile is uphill. The next half a mile is up a steep hill. So by the time I get to the middle of the hike, I'm pretty much out of breath, and it gets easier the more you do it, and then head back home for about 3.5 miles on an empty stomach. That's before breakfast.
Good for you.
So maybe a cup of coffee or two, then head off, do it, and then have breakfast. So it's 9 o'clock in the morning, roughly, depending on what I'm doing when I'm having breakfast. So there's a significant amount of not eating time overnight. And I do it now without thinking. And I mentioned the dog is a crucial part of it. And I'd recommend anyone who's able to and enjoys the company of animals, a dog that will get you out and sit in front of you and demand that you go out just to motivate you is really, really helpful. Clearly, it's not for everyone, but it helps me.
Sure.
And it's also, I've heard it described, one of my guests described a similar sort of regime as the golden hour in his day. It's his favorite hour. The stresses of work aren't there. They might be in the background, but they're not there in that moment. And you're getting some great exercise. You're getting out into the fresh air. You're getting sunlight and all the benefits that brings, that most people are deficient in, just getting enough sunlight. So it hits a number of bases.
Absolutely. I was just getting ready to point that out. As I've learned more over the years and just reading about all this and talking to people, I'm realizing that our circadian rhythm is just more and more important for overall health, and early morning sunlight is a big part of that. And not only does it help with melatonin later that night, which helps you sleep, but vitamin D and other things. And so I think that's a big part that a lot of people are missing is getting that sunlight. Any time of day is good, but I think especially early in the morning. And so you're kind of getting multiple birds with one stone there, getting your exercise while you're fasting and getting sunlight. But so I love that you're doing that. What would you say to people though who say, well, gosh, I've got to be at the office at 8 o'clock and, I don't have time to go walk my dog for an hour and a half. What would you say to those people?
Well, I would say we all have the same number of hours in the day. And a lot of us lead busy lives, and it's up to the individual, I think, to try to manipulate their day and their lifestyle to accommodate some exercise, and fully acknowledge that first thing in the morning, perhaps you're a family with children and other responsibilities, and it just isn't physically possible to get in what might seem like a selfish act to head off alone for an hour to get some exercise. Maybe afternoon or evening is easier for you, or lunch hour. Let's say you're an office person, you head off to the office during the day and you do get an hour break. Well, make it a point to, during that hour, to walk and to maybe have your lunch quickly afterwards. There's a way, if you are really determined to do it. And what I do is I try to, at least mentally, schedule my exercise for the day, or indeed for the week if it involves going to the gym or doing some other form of exercise. Schedule it before everything else. Now, clearly you've got your fixed points. You've got to go to work. You've got to do whatever you need to do, take the children to school. You've got your fixed points that you have to accommodate. But there might be other things that you do during the week that you enjoy doing, but if you think about it, are probably not as important as you getting your exercise in. So schedule your exercise, put it in the calendar, make sure you do it. Treat it like an appointment. Treat it like a hair appointment or a doctor's appointment or a dentist's appointment, but do it every day. And eventually it becomes routine, so that you don't think too hard about it. You just do it. And that's my answer to that, and easily acknowledge that it's very difficult for some people to find that hour. But it comes down to your priorities, and it's a cliche, isn't it? There's nothing more important than your health. And if you don't have your health, it's not good for you, and it's not good for people around you. So that's my justification for prioritizing things in my day that will benefit my health.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. Well, let me ask you about nutrition, and that could be a whole episode in and of itself. But, you mentioned that you fast. With what you've learned over the years in your own studies and interviewing these experts, what do you feel like is the healthiest diet for you? And has that changed over the years as you've kind of been doing this?
This is probably one of the most contentious areas, isn't it, in terms of what the best diet is for me. And it's purely based on my interpretation of the science and the advice that I've listened to and the experts that I've listened to. And so my conclusion that I'm applying to myself now, and that might change if science changes over the coming years in terms of what I'm doing, I'm quite prepared to adapt my dietary lifestyle. But at the moment, I've settled on a mostly plant-based diet. I certainly limit my animal protein intake, because I believe that there is some strong science to suggest that simply isn't good for me, that there is some correlation with certain cancers, for example, with an excessively high animal protein diet. So for me, I believe a low protein diet is best. I do all the time-restricted eating in relation to those meals, so I get my protein from legumes, from beans, from peas, and a lot of colourful vegetables. So I have a breakfast of some oatmeal and some fruits and maybe some yogurt, and I do eat a little bit of dairy, and I'll have salads during the day and vegetables, steamed vegetables, mixed with, I like Indian food, so a curry sort of dressing, which gives you some spices and gives you some flavor. And I'm one of those people that actually doesn't really mind eating very similar food every day. And a lot of my friends hate that. Friends and loved ones hate the fact that I can eat the same meal repeatedly, but it actually works for me. I've settled on something that I like, that in terms of lifestyle is easy to achieve, and I'm busy like you. I want my meals to be easy and quick to prepare. So, and I suppose the reason for continuing to do this is that I feel as if I'm doing quite well on it, and I certainly don't lack in any energy or even strength or physical strength. I can go to the gym and lift weights, and I don't run. I used to do marathons and triathlons. I do more hiking and slower movement in that respect now, but I don't feel not including so much protein, and especially animal protein, in my diet is doing me any harm. And I think it's doing me a lot of good.
Okay. Very good. And I think you hit the nail on the head. You have to find out what works for you.
Right.
And so, and not to get into a debate, although I guess we could. I'm probably I'm the complete opposite. And so I get most of my calories from meat, and I prefer red meat. I don't always get them from red meat, but I prefer that over pork. But, and kind of my goal in 2022, my New Year's resolution is to eat more organ meat. So I've been eating more liver. Even recently, I've been eating some raw liver, and I've got a beef heart that's in my freezer that I haven't cooked yet. So, but anyways, I'm trying to get more organ meats. And so I'm not a complete carnivore by any means, but I try to base everything. Like I said, probably the complete opposite of you in that I try to base everything around meat, and then everything else is just, a little bit extra. I will say I just got my yearly lab work. Actually, yesterday, just got it in today. Everything's fantastic. My insulin levels were 3, and that's a very good indicator that I use a lot. Dr. Benjamin Bickman, I've had him on my podcast before. He wrote the book Why We Get Sick, and he talks a lot about the harm of elevated insulin levels, which I see every day. Obviously, not only diabetes and other things, and we can go down that rabbit hole. But anyways, it's not the only marker, obviously, but very good marker of inflammation in the body and different things. Again, there's a lot of those, but so I, like you, I feel good, and my lab markers are really good, but I don't think that, as I've learned, I don't think there's one diet for everybody. I see a lot of people here in the Midwest who are insulin resistant or already type 2 diabetic. And so for those people, I may push more of a keto diet because the high fat is going to be the best as far as insulin surges and getting those insulin levels down. And but I'm certainly not one of those people that say, hey, it's keto or bust. Now, I do have some, and just to talk about, maybe the carnivore-ish diet, people would say, well, why do you do that? From a clinical perspective, people who do strict carnivore, which there's not too many of them, it's a very restrictive diet, but I have never seen like anything more powerful than a carnivore diet in some of these people who have autoimmune disease. And so that's really the only ones that I will kind of push that towards is these people who have severe autoimmune disease. And I had a patient just a couple of weeks ago who had really severe psoriatic arthritis, and he had tried everything. And of course, he went to see a rheumatologist and got on I think he was on Humira, and he got a little bit of relief from that, but never resolved it. And so he tried paleo diet. Of course, he was still eating fruits and vegetables, and eventually that led him to a strict carnivore diet where he's eating all kinds of organ meats, even thymus glands and spleen and liver and all that, which I haven't gone that far yet. But anyways, completely resolved his psoriatic arthritis. And so I've heard a lot of those types of stories from carnivore, which I haven't necessarily heard from people doing more of a plant-based. But again, it's highly individualized, and I do realize I'm very familiar with Walter Longo, and I'm understand about the mTOR and all that, and so I think it's one of those things that's it's kind of a fine balance of mTOR building muscle, because muscle is a good thing. And so I think when you're throwing in the fasting, you're throwing in the exercise, the body can kind of adapt and tolerate a lot. Now, which ones are better? I don't know. That's probably going to be debated for many years to come. I'm not one to quote all the studies. I don't know if you ever have listened to Paul Saladino. He's actually out in your way, and he's really good at those debates and quoting all those studies. Now, of course, he's kind of hardcore carnivore. I'm not necessarily hardcore, but I do kind of revolve most of my calories around meat.
I think that's fascinating. I think what's really interesting is that here we have two people independently coming to a conclusion about their own diet and what they feel, you and I, is best for ourselves, and acknowledging that we're all very different and that different diets can produce different results in different people. I think equally it is confusing for people who are in a quandary about their health and are not feeling 100% and wondering if a modification to their diet can make a difference. And therefore, which way to go. And they listen to you and I saying that, well, I'm plant-based and I'm feeling pretty great, and you're talking about mostly your meat-based diet and feeling great as well. Right. This, I think, emphasizes the need for education, for studies, for research, and science-based advice for people to begin to make those decisions. Because I don't know what your experience is with your sort of medical colleagues and other doctors when patients pose those questions. Look, I'm not feeling great. I'm wondering whether I can change my diet. Which direction should I go? You're going to get 6 different answers, aren't you? Or maybe more than 6 different answers if you talk to a range of family practitioners.
Yeah, no doubt. And I try to simplify it for patients, at least starting off. Most of our population is eating a lot of processed foods. So if we can just eliminate that or significantly decrease that, then we're going to make huge improvements on our health. And so I try to tell people, look, eat foods with one ingredient. Now, if that's plant-based, I mean, that fits that. That's one ingredient foods. If you want to eat eggs and a steak, that's one ingredient foods. But, I try to always tell people that to just simplify it, because I don't want them leaving my office and think, should I do vegetarian? Should I do keto? What is keto? What I don't understand. It's just overwhelming. But if they can remember, he said one ingredient foods, this food. Okay. So broccoli is one ingredient. It's just broccoli. I can eat broccoli. And so if nothing else, if they remember that, I think that they will make significant improvements to their health.
Here's this little anecdote from my perspective. A few years ago, I thought I was eating a lot of healthy foods. I had a lot of nuts, spinach, almonds, beetroot, rhubarb were some of my favorite foods. And then I got kidney stones, all foods that are high in oxalate. And I'd been overdoing it. And I had kidney stones, coincidentally quite rare, in both sides at the same time, which required some pretty quick surgery to open me up so that the urine could flow and I could continue living. It was actually quite a serious, potentially a serious situation. And the lesson in that for me, which I've really adhered to ever since, is absolutely moderation in everything. And if you think something is good for you, don't go over the top and eat too much of it. Have a colorful diet and spread out the carbohydrates and the proteins and the fats in terms of where you're getting them from, and don't overindulge. It's a real lesson that I think a lot of people probably don't realize until something like what I experienced happens to them. You've got to be super careful in terms of making these decisions about what you eat, even though you think something is good for you.
Yep. No doubt. Yeah. That's great advice. I mean, you could say that about wine. Everybody's like, oh yeah, red wine, you get the resveratrol and all that. But I mean, obviously you too much red wine is harmful. It's not only not beneficial, but harmful. So, what are some other things you've learned? Do you get into in kind of the longevity space? Do you get into much kind of quote biohacking? I kind of do some crazy stuff out there. Like I get into my cold swimming pool in the winter time. I call that biohacking, and I get in my sauna a lot, especially this time of year. What are some of the things you've learned from guests over the years that or do you do any type of quote biohacking?
Well, I mean, the examples you mentioned are good examples, and I've tried certainly the sort of cold water therapy, and in my sort of running days, the benefits are very obvious in terms of muscle recovery and muscle repair. It's interesting. I haven't actually done it yet. I'm going to be doing it in the next few weeks, some cryotherapy, where I actually go to unit and stand for 3 minutes in extremely cold temperatures. That is something I haven't done yet, but I'm looking forward to doing it because and again, the science is, I think the jury is still out to a large extent in terms of exactly what is happening to us or potentially happening in those 3 minutes. But the anecdotal evidence is very, very strong that it's good for us. So that's something I'm going to try. In terms of biohacking, one thing that I've done is just lend myself to being the human guinea pig. And I've been looking into urolithin A recently with a Swiss company that I've been dealing with, a metabolite in our guts that we all generate by eating plants. Pomegranates in particular are high in allagitannins, which are then converted into the gut to urolithin A. Urolithin A, metabolite very important for mitochondrial health and ergo muscular health, and frailty being a big issue as you get older. Muscular health is all important. So I've been looking into and taking part in some experimentation at home in terms of urolithin A supplementation. We all generate or produce in our guts urolithin A to different extents, and this was the particular experiment that I was involved in to determine whether I'm a high producer, low producer, medium producer, and as to whether supplementation with urolithin A or a synthetic urolithin A will be beneficial to me. And I find that kind of experimentation fascinating at a n=1 level. I love doing that sort of thing. And I suppose my interest was piqued when I took part in the Volta Longo clinical trial, just seeing how individuals can really play a very important role in helping scientists develop these different protocols.
Okay. So have you researched hormones much, or you talked to many people on your podcast about maybe hormone optimization as a tool for, longevity and quality of life?
Haven't delved too deeply into hormones. One thing I'm going to begin to look at is NAD.
It's a big one now.
A lot of people are talking about, and as I understand it, there are two different ways that we can accelerate our NAD production, NR supplementation, or NMN, which again, future podcasts that I'm going to be doing in the next few weeks are going to look into that. And I'm going to be doing an at-home test to determine my levels of NAD to see on the scale where I am. So I think that's really interesting. I think the whole area of supplementation is interesting. I've always been and still am to some extent skeptical about supplementation. I think it's a huge marketplace, of course. There's a tremendous amount of money being made out of supplements, many of which I believe if you have and you know this, I'm preaching to the converted here, but if you've got a great diet and exercise regime, a lot of the supplementation that people pay dollars for probably isn't necessary, but I think some supplementation probably is important. Was it you? I think it was you did an episode about magnesium.
Yeah, just recently. Yeah.
I listened to that, and it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating, and in terms of the sleep issue, I think I agree with you. I think magnesium is one of those supplements that is probably important to us. But I like to look at each individual component of supplementation rather than taking a mix of everything, which maybe if you don't have time to look into it is a good safety point. It's a good insurance policy.
I agree 100%. I call it targeted supplementation. And so that's what I tell patients, because unfortunately, a lot of doctors that do what I do, they sell supplements, and then people will go into their offices and they come out with $500 worth of supplements, and I don't like that. I don't agree with that. I will say, people ask me all the time, what supplements should I be taking? And, obviously that depends on the individual, but I can say with pretty universally, almost everybody should be on vitamin D and magnesium. Those are my two big ones, and vitamin D being the big one most. And it's probably not as bad in California. It's a little sunnier there than it is here, but almost everybody here. And I check vitamin D levels on everyone, and almost everybody's low. And I like levels to get. When we see a range of vitamin D, it's a huge range. You're going to see on the lab anywhere from 30 to 100, and I like to see people on that upper range of normal, because vitamin D is actually a hormone. It's not even really a vitamin. But with all hormones, I like to optimize hormones. And so I like really seeing that vitamin D level up. And so with that, my clinical experience in the last 2 years treating COVID, people with high vitamin D levels, they do fine. And this was actually validated just recently. A study came out showing that people with a vitamin D level of greater than 50 had a 0 mortality rate due to COVID. And I'm like, well, that's not something you hear on the news, unfortunately. But anyway, so vitamin D is a big one. I really try to preach for people to know their vitamin D levels, get their vitamin D levels up before they get COVID. And, and then most likely, there's other factors, obviously, but most likely that's going to help them out a lot. So vitamin D, magnesium, the two big ones. And as far as, I was asking about hormones, I'm certified in an organization called Age Management Medicine, which was just extra training in age management medicine. And they really push hormone optimization, which I'm a big believer in, for men and women, because as we get older, our hormones, obviously naturally decline. And so as we optimize those hormones, I think it helps. There's a lot of health benefits to that. And not only does it improve the health span, but it just, it improves quality of life, and it just improves so many things. I think when we kind of optimize those hormones. So, do you? I'm sorry. While we're still on supplements, so what? If you don't mind me asking, I mean, what do you take? Kind of what's your, or do you have necessarily a supplemental regimen?
Well, actually, recently I've only been taking my MitoPure, so the urolithin A supplementation,
Okay.
and because I've been delving into that quite deeply, I haven't wanted to skew any potential results by taking other things.
Okay.
And I think that is an issue, isn't it? If you're taking lots of different types of supplementation, clearly there is a potential crossover in terms of the effects on how you feel. There may not be a biochemical crossover, but sometimes the ultimate result for people is simply how I feel and how I'm performing every day and how my sleep is and how I'm able to lift weights at the gym or go for my walk. I don't want to kind of skew the results by taking different forms of supplementation when I'm trying to identify just one component that could potentially be beneficial for me. So really that is the only thing that I've been taking, and I try to have a very colourful diet and, as I say, with exercise as well. That pretty much serves me well.
Very good. Very smart. So
let me ask you this question, just getting off the area of supplementation. It's one question that I often ask people generally towards the end of the interview, and that is, clearly you've got a passion for health and for longevity. In terms of looking forward in your life, the decades to come, do you have longevity aspirations? Some people think very deeply about the fact that they want to get to, in this sphere of research, they want to get to 100, that there is a goal. Do you have a goal? And if you do, what is your motivation for wanting to be very old and hopefully very healthy?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, my wife asks me that a lot because she sees me do crazy stuff like, get in the cold pool in the wintertime. And, she always says, I don't know why you're doing that, because, I'm probably going to, live till, 85. So if you live to 100, then, you're going to be by yourself. So I don't know, why you're so motivated to live that long. So, I don't really have a number in mind. I think I do it for several reasons. One is I just want to feel good and just optimize my health to the best of my ability. But I haven't really thought of a specific number. Now, I would certainly, that being said, I would certainly like to live well into my 90s, just, to watch my kids grow up and my grandkids. I got started fairly late in life having kids. And so to really have much to do with my grandkids, I'm going to have to live pretty old. And so that's probably one motivation. And then another is I love to see what the body is capable of. Even now at my age, I just kind of like pushing the envelope a little bit. And I want to see what the body can do in my 50s, in my 60s, in my 70s, in my 80s. And obviously that's going to look different in my 80s than it does now.
And what age are you now?
I'm 48.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're a young guy then?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm almost 50, but, and the other thing I would say too is I love fitness. I love working out. Again, I've done full marathons. I've done, last year I did a bucket list thing and competed in a physique competition, which was a kind of a unique experience, and especially at my age. And I wanted to get real low body fat. Of course, I had to for that, and I did, and now I'm back to doing CrossFit at 48 years old, which is can be pretty rough, and I'm modifying. So I want to be able to still do those things as I'm older, because I just love physical fitness. Now, it's going to look different again in my 60s and 70s and 80s. I'm probably not going to be doing CrossFit, in my 60s and 70s. And or probably not running marathons, but I want to do something. And so that's a motivating factor for me too, is just to stay healthy and be able to do those kinds of things.
Yeah, and I would probably tell the story in exactly the same way, that I still want to be, and my 60s start as we record this towards the end of January in just a few weeks' time.
Okay.
I'll be 60 in March. And I suppose I've gone through that phase of doing a lot of triathlons and marathons. And, well, I would never say never, but I don't think they're going to happen again. But I do a lot of...
Probably not for me either, so...
Right, there you go. But I do a lot of hiking and still get out there and really just enjoy it as much. It's the experience of doing exercise, no matter what that form of exercise is. And that's what I want to continue to do until I'm as old as I can be, and continue to do that. And it's about, I think, getting to an age where you can share your wisdom, you can share your lifetime experiences with other people. You talked about children and grandchildren. What strikes me is that a lot of people, I don't have children, but a lot of the people I interview, it's the first thing that they mention in terms of why they want to get old and be healthy and continue to be healthy. It is those people that are close to you, being with them, seeing children grow up. And a lot of people, those that don't have children, talk about they want to, maybe educators want to continue to teach and to share the wisdom of their decades. And that's a big motivation. I suppose the point is, what I'm saying is, it's very rarely a selfish thing. It's very rarely just about me. It's about the role that you can continue to play. And I know in terms of what I do and the work especially that I do, I'm one of those people that there are never quite enough hours in the day. There's always something else I need to do and want to do. Retirement doesn't even come into my mindset. It's a kind of lifestyle. I just want to keep on doing it productively, doing it sensibly. And that for me is a good motivation to keep on living and keep on living as healthy as I can.
Excellent. Okay. So on that note, as we kind of wrap up here, so I always ask my guests to give us one health tip that could make us healthier today. So with all that you've learned and with what you do, what would you say to that?
It's difficult focusing on just one health tip, isn't it? I would say maybe something that we haven't talked about. I would say drink lots of water. It's a very simple one.
Yeah.
Drink clean water. Do it first thing in the morning when you get up. And if you're the kind of person who doesn't want to get up too much overnight, well, maybe stop drinking your water mid-afternoon, but get a good couple of liters of water at least in during the day. You'll feel better for it. You'll be hydrated, all those obvious reasons why you should drink water. But I think as far as your general well-being is concerned, if you do that consistently, you say, what's going to benefit me today? That's going to benefit you.
Very good.
How would you answer that one?
Well, I know we've been talking about it, but again, I love exercise so much. I'm going to have to say exercise. People just don't move enough, and especially in this part of the country, the few times that I've been out there, it seems like, people, on the coast do a little bit better job, but out here in the Midwest, where, we're one of the top obese states in the nation. Yeah. People just aren't moving, and so I just try to get people to maybe get 5,000 to 7,000 steps in a day to start there. But exercise specifically, just move.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I only mentioned water because we hadn't talked about it. If you give me a blank piece of paper, I would have said exercise as well. That being the absolute number one. That's why it's in my routine. That's why I do it every day. It doesn't have to be a 3.5 mile hike before breakfast. It can be a determination to go to the market and to park as far away from the front door as possible. It's getting those steps in. Use the technology, use a watch or whatever, count your steps, get to 6,000, get to 10,000, get to 15,000 a day, and see how you feel on that. And generally, you're going to feel pretty good. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, I'd love maybe when I retire, I can do that. I'd love to be in a place where I could get up in the morning and just go on a 3-mile walk, especially. And I don't know if you live in the mountains or, whatever, but, of course, around here where I'm at, there's really nothing to see, nowhere to walk, so.
Yeah, and first to acknowledge that I do live in the canyons to the north of Los Angeles, so it's the Wild West out here. You see a few coyotes, and you've got to watch out for the rattlesnakes on the hike, but it feels good.
Yeah, very good.
Great. I really enjoyed this. Thank you
so much for your time.
And if you'd like to hear more from Greg, his podcast is FitRx, which you can find at drgregdennis.com, or Greg's clinic, vibrantlifedc.com. DC stands for Direct Care. Those details are also in the show notes for this episode at our website, lamapodcast.com, LLAMA podcast.com. This has been a HealthSpan Media production. If you've enjoyed it or have anything to say about it, you can review us at Apple Podcasts. You can contact me in social media at Peter Bowes or via email, peter@lamapodcast.com. We'll be back with another episode very soon. Oh, and if you haven't come across it already, we now have a Sunday supplement to the podcast. It's short and sweet, about 10 minutes. My Day, My Life delves into the daily routines of people who are living life to the full and have, in one way or another, mastered the art of aging. You can find full details at our website. Thanks so much for listening. Health optimization is what this podcast is all about, and that means taking care of our mitochondria, the energy centres of our cells. Physical strength, avoiding frailty is key, and that's why the science behind urolithin A and the work of Timeline Nutrition is so interesting. You can find out more and get a discount code at our website and in the show notes for this episode.